Welcome back, artists. I'm Waiya Paints, and today I'm getting R-rated in this video. To celebrate the release of Deadpool and Wolverine, the artists over at SuperShark released their latest sculpt of Wasteland Deadpool, and they thought I was just the to do him justice, and they decided to sponsor today's video. And holy is this STL dripping with Easter eggs. Not only is it going to take a keen eye and a steady hand, but it's also going to take plenty of time to do him right. So, meet me over by the painting table. I'm going to grab my brushes. Let's get started. Since this model has so many parts, it's going to be a good idea to break it down to smaller, manageable steps. So for the base, we're looking at three main components: a standard rocky foundation, a destroyed Xavier Institute plaque, and snow. And there's this hole. Now, don't shame me. There's a reason. I was a silly goose and forgot to put large drain holes for cleaning, so I was forced to break a hole in. Thankfully, it's on the bottom and it's going to be covered by felt, so no big deal. I'd rather have a nasty hole than not properly cleaning out uncured resin. With that said, let's get painting. So I started with hammered copper for the metal. I'm on a bit of a timeline on this one, so I'm gonna need to save as much time as I can on these simple steps so I can invest it with all the details I need to paint later. So relying on dry brushing will be the name of the game, as I need a thin base as fast as I can manage. And maybe it's just me, but it seems like every time there's a disaster in the Marvel universe, the X-Men school always gets wrecked, even more so than Avengers Tower. I guess even in the apocalypse, the X-Men just can't escape the hate. To base the rocks, Castle Gray. Here again, an all-over heavy dry brush gets the job done fast. While most of this was going to be covered with snow later, I plan on there being plenty of patches of stone showing through underneath to really sell the idea of snow sitting on top of stone. So I based everything here outside of the exposed metal, whether it looked like stone or not. Now for some shading with light tone and Nuln Oil. I gave all of the bronze the light tone treatment. Most of this will be covered in weathering I plan on doing, so my focus here is just to begin the patina, so I have a good base to start from. But when it comes to the rocks, a bit more care is needed, as a good portion of this will still be visible, so any weird pooling should be addressed. But just know, with adding snow later, any glaring mistakes can be hidden. Next, a highlight of spaceship exterior. I'm looking for definition on the edges of the rocks, so once that edge highlighting showed up, I move on to a different area. This helps prevent over-highlighting. Once everything gets a first pass, you can reevaluate to see if any areas need a little bit more and add accordingly. But again, remembering that there's going to be a lot going on with this base along with the snowpack, so the rocks won't be under any great scrutiny. They're gonna look fine so long as you don't overdo it and blow out all the contrasting from the shadow and midtone. Now for a dusting of bright bronze. Again, with all the weathering that will happen later, most of this will be hidden, but I want to give the lettering just a little bit of a step up to help the readability. Because ultimately, I find the best weathering starts with a good, clean base. I partially built the base to get a sense of how everything was fitting together, and I like how this is going. So let's take a look at these I-beams. Like most of the base, there's going to be some snowpack on them, but besides this interesting bendiness they have, they look fairly standard. I wanted them to be a darker, more oxidized iron, so I based them in rough iron. This is so the plaque can stand out a little bit more. This is because I didn't want these I-beams to draw more attention than the more significant lore attached debris. The final large base element is this down telephone pole, and like the I-beams, I don't want this to be too distracting, so I started by basing it in charred brown. Thankfully, this dark tone fits the scene without much extra weathering, since it was already plenty dark, as I was going for a waterlogged and scorched look. So I grabbed old bristly here to roughly base everything I can reach, while the spots I can't remained primer black, and it worked out perfect. Sometimes in painting, you get an easy tee up, and it's always a goal of mine to take advantage of those moments for an easy win. But that doesn't mean I won't highlight it with a bit of leather brown. Once again, Big Floof comes to the rescue to add a rough highlight using a somewhat wet dry brush. The irregular pattern here will quickly produce a very good looking worn pool. Just be sure to get crispy edge highlights. I backed that up with a fast once over of light tone. While I liked the look of the stressed wood, it was giving me too much of a sun-bleached wood vibe, which really didn't fit with the snow-covered theme of the piece. So a thin wash toned everything down to more of a chocolate that I wanted. And just like the I-beams, being on the darker side will help keep this from distracting from the rest of the model. Next, a bit of dark gunmetal for the resistors. This calls for a bit of clean painting to block out the mounts and the upper bulbs. Just don't forget to flip it over and get the underside, as these areas tend to be easy to miss. Then I switched over to a lighter gunmetal, this time with a bit of a heavy dry brush to brighten up the edges and starting to shine up the bulbs. Using a floofy brush here lets this creep a little bit into the deeper areas, so it's a good idea to be mindful with the pressure so it doesn't go too far. Keeping the strokes perpendicular to the opening will also help with this. For a final push of highlights, silver. Here I went with a stiffer, short bristle dry brush, mainly for control, as I wanted to ensure my highlight went where I wanted it to. Every tool has its use, and this one is perfect for this job. Just a few swipes on each terminal, and it was time for a bit of shading with Nuln Oil. This is just to add a bit more separation between the different wood parts that are joined and some around each terminal, to show a bit of the rot where the metal has been oxidizing. It's important to exercise restraint, to not overdo this and lose all that nice texture we've built up. Taking a bit of a break from the base proper, I hopped over to their first major Easter egg detail, Deadpool's unicorn, starting with Void Shield Blue. Now, I don't believe Wade has a standardized unicorn, so painting this like the artist render seems like the easy choice. And with pastel colors, this will certainly stand out, even with how much was going on with the base. But putting a pastel over black does mean it's going to take several coats to get full opacity. So don't get discouraged if yours looks a bit patchy. At the end of the day, mine took like 5 coats until it was ready to move on. For an accent, Toxic Boils. Since I based most of the areas in blue, this lavender will go on much quicker, needing only 2 passes to look good. But then it needed some panel lining with Daruchi Violet. This is the first step that you're going to need steady hands to complete, but don't worry too much about it, as it's pretty easy to clean up any wonky lines. Just don't be like me and paint straight from the bottle, or at least if you do, pay attention to where your hands are to prevent this from happening to you. Yep, Waiya paints. Feeling like a pro painter today. I've wasted so much shade over the years doing this, and just like Wolverine, it hurts every time. Learn from my mistakes. As you can see, the frustration of spilling so much shade translated into some very nervous and shaking hands when finishing up the panel lining. So a bit of cleanup to straighten and thin them was needed. We all make mistakes. You just have to be willing to accept them and take the time to go back and correct it. Once cleaned, a detail brush with a bit of black is all it takes to finish off Wade's one-horned companion. It's so fluffy I could die. Now, switching gears back to the base, it's time for weathering. And after years of hearing gospels sung about its results, I picked up a combo pack of Dirty Down Rust and Verdigris to make this super fast. Be forewarned, you need good ventilation when you use this stuff, but you don't want to be sitting in a draft, because this stuff dries super fast. If you got a bit of a breeze in your workspace, you might find that this dries a whole lot faster than you can imagine. For application, I started pretty reserved as I didn't know how it would look on top of the bronze. But as I started working, I got more comfortable using it, and I came to realize that it wants a bit of a heavier application, akin to an all-over wash. The areas that got thin cover tend to dry a very dark brown, while areas that had a touch of pooling tended to dry more of an orange. Overall, I'm very impressed on how fast and easy this makes adding organic looking rust to metal. Though over darker metals like the I-beam, it has a less of a pronounced effect. I'll definitely have to experiment with this more in the future. Now time to move on to the Verdigris. Just like the rust, this stuff dries fast, so you'll want to work quickly. But because this is Verdigris, you want to take a less is more approach. So I focused on areas that would catch and hold on water the most, and then just worked from there. One thing to keep in mind with both of these products is that they will reactivate in the presence of water. So on one hand, you can rework areas with just a wet brush. But when you layer them on top of each other, you want to use a bit more of a dabbing stipple. Using brush strokes will end up scrubbing up the rust underneath, which can be a thing you want occasionally to add a bit more variety to the weathering, but if you want to get those bright greens to manifest, you need it to sit on top. In a pinch, you could lightly seal it, but be careful, as heavy use of a clear coat will also reactivate this stuff and change the final look. With everything weathered, it was finally time for some snow texture paint to bring the base together. This stuff can be kind of challenging to work with, as it usually wants to stick to the brush more than the model. Thankfully, this stuff is non-toxic, so getting a finger or two in there to help get it where you want to won't be a big deal. One thing to be aware of though, is since this has water in it, it can and will reactivate the dirty down. So in these areas, you really want to place the snow rather than brushing it on. Or you can end up with some brown and green tinted snow. If that happens to you, just wait until it dries and then add a little bit more on top. Also, be sure to keep the areas that other parts are going to attach to this base clear of the snow, as it'll change the topography and interfere when you want to assemble it. When it comes to the pole, it's going to be slightly more complicated adding snow as compared to the base, as you want to keep in mind the angle that the pole is going to be at. Putting it into its slot will help you visualize this. You want to keep the snow to areas that in practice could catch the snow. So while the two crossbars along the top will get a good blanket, you want there to be a bit of a bleed over on the angled side. Also, don't forget to snow up the upturned side of the lower support plank. Throwing the base together to see if everything fits, and I was pretty happy with the look. I'll be adding more snow later once I get weight in there, but right now, it's looking solid. With the base done, this seemed like a perfect time to take a second and thank my subscribers over on Patreon. Your monthly support is keeping the dream alive, and I can't thank you enough. If you would like to join the Painting Pantheon, you'll find a link to my Patreon in the description below. You can even join for free to get updates and behind-the-scene pictures of whatever projects I'm cooking up next. If you don't feel like going over there, you can support the channel right here by subscribing and slamming that like button. It's the #1 way to grow our community here and make sure my face gets on more screens. I'd also like to extend a special thank you to today's sponsor, SuperShark. They provided today's STL, and I've gotta say, nice work. They also were the ones that sculpted the Wolverine I did a few weeks ago, and I think Logan and DP are gonna look great together on my shelf. If you want to get your hands on this and many other amazing STLs, be sure to check out the link to their Patreon below. But for now, that frozen wasteland isn't gonna stay cold forever. Let's get back to it and get Wade suited up for action. Now to paint Wade himself. Seeing as his boots are so detailed, I opted to paint these separate to give them the attention they deserve. No need to be intimidated by it, because again, we can break this down into smaller chunks as well. To start me off, terracotta. I gave a majority of the shoe a solid basing to serve as the foundation for Wilson's signature blood red. While I will be adding accent colors to different panels, it's important to heavily use his main colors so that his shoes fit in with his accent and don't end up looking too busy, even with so many details. To highlight, vermilion. Using a light dry brush will bring a nice brightness to the reds without losing the depth that comes with terracotta. And from now on, this will be the recipe for all of the red in his main costume. So keeping these colors nearby will be helpful. You might need to do some aggressive scrubbing to get in between the laces. Just be sure to keep the pigment on the brush light so it doesn't blow out the underlying terracotta. After placing a quick mask to protect my work, I based the steel plate starting with my dark gunmetal. Followed by a light highlight with the brighter Fanatic gunmetal. This will give the impression of an overhead light source by making a slightly brighter sheen on the caps of the steel toes. After removing the mask to see the results, I was happy with the look and I moved on to Hardened Carapace. This was used to paint the leather reinforcement patch and the spike bands. Since the terracotta has a bit of brown in it, this deeper brown fits in perfectly. And while I am avoiding the laces here, it's not really important to do so as they're going to be painted later. After the belts dried, I gave each of the spikes a plating of gunmetal. Then I grabbed a bit of ash gray to pick out the trim. Now, you don't have to stress over getting this perfect. While the jury's out on whether Wade is a sneakerhead, in the Wasteland, nothing stays perfect for long. So any slight errors here will just read as worn wear and tear. Just don't overpaint on the other areas and you should be good. Think of this as a good chance to practice your manual edge highlighting and focus on using the side of the brush, not the tip. For the bear on the toe cap, I started in with some leather brown for the base. Then a few spots of black for the eyes and mouth. A few spots of vermilion for its rosy cheeks and tongue. Then a bit of khaki to define his muzzle and a splash of brightness for his inner ears. Then it was time to pick out all the buckles using a bright bronze from earlier. Best advice here is to use a small brush and try to hold the boot so that you can paint in straight lines. And if need be, don't hesitate from doing a few practice strokes before you even touch the model. That, along with visualizing how you want the brush to behave, goes a long way to helping keep small details like this from derailing your work. After that, the laces were blacked out. This is kind of a high stress time for the boots, as any overpainting here will be kind of a pain to clean up. So go slow and stay clean. As a final detail, each boot had these gears mounted on the top. I based them each in a bright gunmetal followed by a Nuln wash. Then khaki came back to base all the fur lining, backed up with a light tone wash. Then I mounted the ornamental gears in place in order to paint on the DP symbols, starting with vermilion. In such a small space, layering highlights is unnecessary. Just going straight to the vermilion highlight saves time while keeping cohesiveness with the rest of the main colors. Semi-black circles and light gray half circles finish them off. If you lose the red line separating the two sides, a quick swipe of vermilion will clean it up in a jiffy. Moving up to the main body, I repeated the same red recipe where needed, using terracotta for the base followed by a vermilion dry brush highlight. And just because it's going to be hidden by the cape later, I wanted to show off the heart-shaped hole in the back of his chaps. This is peak Deadpool. Just be sure to keep the dry brush in check here and don't overdo it. I then went over all the black panels with, well, black. Not only to clean up the edges of the red, but to normalize the black, as there are a few spots where Wade only got a dusting of primer, so it looks more gray than black. And in most situations, I would warn people off from using black to paint black parts, and would suggest a very dark gray. But if anyone deserves true black, it's Wade. The only real slowdown here was to get crisp lines for the panels on his mask. While this STL had two options for the head, I couldn't help but to go for the classic pointed hood. It's just one of those designs that was perfect on the first try. If Marvel hasn't saw fit to update it or revamp it, it's good enough for me. And since I had his head out, I might as well drop in some light gray for his eyes. And yay for me, no pupils needed. But I did need to go back and clean up the edge with a bit of black. Cleaning up the eye is a lot easier than trying to get them perfect on the first try, that's for sure. Just slowly edge in the black until you get the eye well defined. If you overdo this, it's pretty painless to drop in some gray and try again. So far, he's looking good, but not done, so it's no time to slow down now. To address his chaps and the leather bits in general, I started with a base of charred brown. Mainly because I wanted a hardy, heavy leather. Lighter leathers tend to seem more luxurious, so it wouldn't really fit in the Wasteland theme. I also used this to paint his main pouches, loincloth, and his bandolier. Then I loaded up some khaki on a scraggly brush and stippled in some wear and tear highlighting all over the leather. So long as you keep this light in a semi-random pattern, it won't take too long to get a convincing looking edge to all of the leather. When stippling, I like to do a bit of conditioning similar to a dry brush after each load. This prevents me from touching the model with a brush that is too loaded with paint. Just keep two things in mind during this step. First, keep your motions as a straight up and down tap. Any side movement will throw off the stipple pattern. And second, don't press too hard, or even a relatively dry brush will dump too much paint. You want to keep your taps light enough that they don't actually cause the bristles to slip across the surface. These cuts on the loincloth were looking a little bit flat, so I gave them each a bit of Nuln Oil just to fill them out. Going back to the bandolier, each of the shotgun shells got a splash of vermilion. While shotgun shells come in many colors, red is just the choice for Deadpool. Then each cap got a coat of greedy gold to finish them off. It's small details like this that look so good when you do it clean. And since I had it out, this was also a good time to take care of all the buckles and hardware. Now, I wanted to handle these leg straps, and since I'm using so much black in the main body, I went with mountain stone for these, so they can be dark but not too dark to get lost on top of those brown chaps. Then it was time to hop back to Castle Gray to base all the bandages on his legs and arms. Followed by a null and oil wash to add a bit of dirt and wear and tear to all of them. To take care of this first Hello Kitty, I based it in a medium gray, with the idea of having an easier time with the spaceship exterior later. And while it did help, I still ended up needing quite a few coats to get the full coverage I was looking for, so I ended up skipping it for the later ones. Then just a few drops of vermilion and black fleshed out the details to get this cat purring. To clean up the wristbands and improve readability, I pasted them all in black and coated all of the charms in Spaceship. Since these are going to have light, bright colors, this will keep me from needing tons of coats to get full saturation, especially with yellow. Then, once again, vermilion came in clutch for the bow and mushroom cap. Then I grabbed pastel pink, Andrea blue, and energy shield yellow for the extra details. Just ignore the scarlet. I don't really know why I picked it up, but it was around 5 o'clock and my brain was kind of mush at that point. The charms were pretty straightforward to paint: a small pink and blue rainbow, yellow star, yellow Pikachu, and the tiniest little black dots for eyes. When it comes to the sword hilts, it looks like DP scavenged some copper pipes, so hammered copper was an easy choice, followed by light tone for a bit of definition. Of course, can't forget about this spiky shoulder pad, which got a base of bright gunmetal, followed by null and oil. Coming into the home stretch with just a few more details to paint, this gun was done by first using the charred brown and mountain stone to match the chaps and straps. Hey, that rhymed. Then a bit of gunmetal and greedy gold for the hardware details. And you can't forget about a light oil wash to help separate the different elements. Finally, we have these grenades, which totally need to be Deadpool branded, starting with a vermilion base and then very carefully painted black patches and eye dots. While I did take my time with this, I wasn't looking for perfection. I highly doubt he could find a supplier for personally branded explosives, so I imagine Wade was hand painting these himself, so a bit of jankiness won't really look off here. Unfortunately, one of my nades did have a print error and lost its priming spoon. But no worries, I'll just put that one in the furthest back and no one will notice. It's the apocalypse. Nothing's gonna be perfect. Now to put this statue in the done category, I just need to finish his cloak. And once again, terracotta followed by a vermilion dry brush would finish it off. And I called it done. And oh boy, does he look awesome. I mean, wow. Everywhere I look, there's something interesting to see. While it took quite a bit of work to pull off, I am happy with how it's turned out. All the little small details like the charm bracelets and the scratching of B. Arthur's name onto the blade really gives away that the sculptor is a fan of Deadpool. But what do you all think? Is this a challenge you're ready to take on? If so, be sure to head over to the SuperShark Patreon to get your hands on this and many other amazing sculpts. They've been so good to me in my channel, and their sculpts are top notch. And if you do try your hand at one, be sure to take a picture and hit me up. I'd love to take a look. If you liked this video and found it helpful, it would be a huge help to subscribe and like. We recently crossed 1,500 strong in our community and on our way to 1,600, but I can't get there without you. For now, I have to get working on the next project. So as always, thank you for watching, stay creative, and always enjoy the process.